All right, geometry students, quad 5, our last of the reviewing quadratics. We are now going to solve quadratics. Reminder, this is a quadratic using the quadratic formula. You've possibly been introduced to the quadratic formula. Doesn't mean you remember it. Here it is, the opposite of b. Whatever b is, you want the opposite of it. Plus or minus the square root of, take b and square it, b squared, minus 4ac, but that's all over 2a. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. Couple keys to this, again, making sure that you take the opposite of whatever b was. You'll solve it once using a plus sign. Opposite of b plus all of this and then divided by 2a. You'll solve it a second time, negative b and the minus all of this divided by 2a. Another key is the b squared. If b is a negative number, let's say we've got negative 3 for b. Negative 3 squared should be 9. But if you're typing in your calculator as negative 3 squared, your calculator will tell you it's negative 9 because your calculator does order of operations properly and you didn't put parentheses. So to save yourself the trouble, since you know that anything squared, any negative number squared, any positive number squared is always positive, don't even put the negative in here. Always make this a positive b squared instead of what it is. Unless you want to use extra parentheses, but that takes a little bit of extra work. All right, memorizing the quadratic formula. Best way to do that is to get this song stuck in your head. If I play this over and over and over and you sing along with it while it's playing, there's a good chance you'll memorize the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Try it. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Not sure if you recognize that, but to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. Don't forget the weasel. All over 2a. Let's try it.
This unforgettable vacation.
Well, I'm going to have to pause that.
It didn't actually.
Okay? And taking a look at the way that I wrote up here, a, b, and c, reminder that a is the coefficient in front of x squared, b is the coefficient in front of x, and c is that constant. So let's try the first example, 3x squared plus 5x minus 8 equals 0. You know that a equals 3, b equals 5, but be careful with the c. Make sure you put it as negative 8. C is negative 8. Careful of your signs. So when that gets plugged into this formula, x equals negative 5 because b was 5. So we need the opposite of it. Plus or minus 5 squared, b squared, minus 4 times 3 times negative 8. Make sure this is a subtraction sign and that's a negative sign. All over 2 times 3. Now we can't just type that in all at once, of course, because number one, we can't type in a plus or minus sign, and there's just pieces that we need to do. So let's do the inside, called the radicand of the square root, not the square root, but start with 5, and we're going to find out what 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 8 is, and you don't need parentheses for this because your calculator knows its order of operations. And I suggest using calculators just so that you don't do all this work and make a mistake in your head. So there's 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 8. I better put my time sign in there. And I hit equals, and it comes out to 121. Now the 121, reminder, is in the square root. So, and we can also take care of 2 times 3. So now we have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 121 all over 6. But again, no calculator on this yet because there are times that square root of 121 is not a perfect square, so we don't want ugly decimals. Also, you can't do plus and minus at the same time. And a friendly reminder that when doing fractions, this division is the same thing as a grouping symbol. If you typed in negative 5 plus the square root of 121 divided by 6, it's going to take square root of 121 divided by 6. We don't want that. We want negative 5 plus square root of 121 divided by 6. So let's clean it up a little and do the 2 different answers. We'll start with negative 5 plus, and if you calculate it out, the square root of 121 is 11. So we're going to take negative 5 plus 11 divided by 6. X equals, of course. And we're going to take x equals negative 5 minus 11 divided by 6. Again, in your head or with a calculator, just make sure you don't make a mistake. But with a calculator, you're going to have to do negative 5 plus 11 in parentheses divided by 6. Negative 5, let me see if I can get this without a glare on it. Negative 5 plus 11 divided by 6 is 1, because it's going to take negative 5 plus 11 first. If you type it in without the parentheses, you're going to get negative 3.16 repeating, which that's not what you're looking for. So we know that x equals 1, and we know that x equals, type it in with your calculator, negative 5 minus 11 divided by 6. If we're looking for decimals, that's fine, negative 2.666666. We're not looking for decimals though. So what you're going to have to do is take negative 5 minus 11, which is negative 16, over 6, reduce it, but keep it improper. They're both divisible by 2 because they're even numbers. You're going to get x equals negative 8/3. And there are your 2 answers. X equals 1, x equals negative 8/3. If we are looking for a decimal, then you're okay with 1 and negative 2.67. We'll try 2 more of these for practice. X squared plus 3x minus 11 equals 0, which means A equals 1 in this case, B equals 3, and C equals negative 11. So again, we have a positive A, a positive B, and a negative C. This will start out as x equals negative 3, the opposite of B, plus or minus, are you singing that song in your head? Plus or minus square root of 3 squared minus 4 times A times C, all over 2A. You can put 2 times 1 if you want to know that you actually did 2 times 1. You could just put 2 if you're a step ahead of yourself. Again, we'll take care of the radicand first. What's under that square root? What is 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 11? Make sure you get what I get. At least try it. You get 3 plus or minus the square root of 53 all over 2. If we're looking for an exact answer, you just found it. We can't simplify it any more than that because negative 3 square root of 53 is not a perfect square, therefore we can't reduce it. That would be your exact answer. If we are looking for approximate answers and we're willing to round it, it'll get typed in as negative 3 plus the square root of 53 divided by 2. And we've talked about this before in class, but anytime you use a square root, it gives you a parenthesis. So when you type in left parenthesis, your calculator gives you a right parenthesis, which means, or your calculator gives you another left parenthesis, which means we need a double right to make this work. Left parenthesis, you got to try it on your calculator, don't just watch me, plus the square root. If your calculator gives you a square root with a parenthesis, you see how I've got two lefts? Then I need to have a right to finish the 53 and a right to finish the parenthesis in front of the negative 3. Divided by 2, it equals, oops, wrong button. It equals 2.14. We're going to the nearest hundredth. 2.14. And it also equals, and if you have a fancy-dancy calculator like mine, you can just hit the up arrow. You don't have to retype it all. Go over here and change your plus to a subtract. Negative 5.14. And those are your two answers. All right, last one. This one's not set up nearly as nice, and until we get it in order, and again equal to 0, we don't solve quadratics unless they equal 0. We've got to get this in order and set it up to make sure that we have A, B, and C. So first, I'm going to add 3x to both sides and add it to its like terms so that it equals 0. But then I'm also going to write this in order as x squared minus 2x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, our A is 1, our B is negative 2 this time, and our C is negative 2. So we're looking at solving that into the quadratic formula. Try it. Go ahead and set it up and see if you get what I get. Pause your video right now. Okay, at this step right here, a couple things. Remember, we want negative B, or the opposite of B. So it was negative 2, but I'm going 2, plus or minus, and this B in here, we're going to always put a positive. Otherwise, it requires an extra set of parentheses to try to do negative 2 squared in parentheses. So 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2, which means you're going to have x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 12. If you take 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 2, you get 12, which is not a perfect square again, all divided by 2. What do we do with that? We're going to let you go decimal on this. Let you go decimal on this, which means it's going to be approximate. What happens when you take parentheses, 2 plus the square root of 12, double right parentheses divided by 2, you get approximately 2.73, and then you do it again as 2 minus, and you get negative 0.73. And I said I'd let you just go decimal, but you're thinking, well, what would I do if it wasn't a decimal? And just so you know, because you'll have to do this eventually, 2 plus or minus the square root of 12, we're going to break down the square root of 12 into 4 times 3 and 2 times 2, which means you take out a pair of 2's, reminder on your radicals, you actually get 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 3. And then instead of writing it all over 2, you're going to write each one of them over 2. So what would the exact answer of this be? X equals 2 divided by 2 is 1, plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1 again, 1 plus or minus the square root of 3. If you were asked for an exact answer, it's a matter of breaking down the radical, finding out how it's simplified, and you have to divide each number by the 2a, by the pop goes the weasel, not just that. If you're curious, if I typed in 1 plus the square root of 3, I would get the same answer, 2.73. If I did 1 minus the square root of 3, I would get negative 0.73. Same answer, but this is the simplified version if ever you were asked for an exact answer. All right, good luck with your quadratic formula. Start singing. X equals negative b plus